So for our first Eton College Sports Society podcast this year, we're very fortunate to have Daniel Geey, one of the UK's top sports lawyers. Daniel's also the author of the best-selling book Done Deal, which is an insider's guide to football, contracts, multi-million-pound transfers and Premier League big business. So thank you very much for joining us today, Daniel.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for being able to say the whole title. It's a bit of a mouthful. But yeah, it's we were trying to work out what the title should be, and thank you for saying bestseller. I think my mum's probably bought the most amount of copies, but apart from that, it's it's been a lot of people have read it. It's great. You guys saying that people generally amazing. Yeah, that's a good sign. Well, hopefully when we get back to some type of normality in the next however many months, I can maybe make an appearance with you guys as well and actually give a talk to everybody, maybe if that would be of value.
We'd love that. Yeah, that'd be great. Daniel, I just thought maybe you could kick us off by telling us a bit about your sort of university career and how you actually got into the industry.
Yeah, so the short answer is just probably like you guys, is that I was massively into sport and really into football. I'm a Liverpool fan, which I'm telling as many people as I can at the moment about. Every day, I remember coming back from school, reading that I'm from Liverpool originally, reading the Liverpool Echo and the Daily Post, which was the local Liverpool papers, and just wanting to get as much info as I could about football, about the industry, about the news, what was going on. And that sort of then, that process developed into university. A lot of my family are lawyers. So I thought even if I didn't want to be a lawyer, I could at least do an undergrad degree in law. And I did it in law and politics, actually, in Manchester Uni. And throughout that time, my idea was, this is literally when the internet was just starting off, is the truth, and emails were starting. It was like a strange world to believe that didn't happen at some point. But so that was the start of when the internet age of football news and info and lots more in-depth articles about stuff that was easily accessible. And I just lapped up everything I could about the football and sports industry. And what that meant really is that when I sort of progressed in my undergrad degree, I was just trying to find ways or excuses to be able to write on sport, is the truth. And that happened in sort of second and third year with my dissertation, which I did on the Bosman ruling, which we can maybe talk about as well. And then the changes to the FIFA transfer system, which basically happened at the turn of the millennium, which is basically when I was at uni, and makes me feel slightly old. But and that's where it stemmed from there. And then I did a master's in football broadcasting rights, where I spent basically the best part of a year reading every single article, more or less, in the English language on sports broadcasting rights, and doing quite a long dissertation and master's degree on that. So that's where it all started, at least.
Perfect. So obviously currently it's a bit different, but what normally does your job entail on a sort of day-to-day basis?
Yep. The short answer is that as much as it sounds fantastic that I'm a football lawyer or a sports lawyer, actually I'm a combination of lots of different facets of that. So I'm a commercial contracts lawyer. I'm sometimes an employment lawyer. I'm sometimes an intellectual property lawyer. I'm sometimes an arbitration lawyer. I'm a disputes lawyer. I'm a reputation management lawyer. So what I mean by that is that I started off not necessarily doing that much work in sport, but then gradually progressed into that area as I sort of developed, greater skills and competencies across law. But my normal day, for example, might be I've had to draft an email today on a possible dispute. I've then marked up an image rights contract. I was talking to agents about potential deals that might be happening over the next window. I've then got an image rights matter to deal with. I had to advise an agent on the intermediary regulations, and that's just for starters sometimes. So what I mean is, when you say football law, I think everyone who's a football fan and wants to be a lawyer wants to be a football lawyer. But actually, the real truth is behind the label. A lot of it is quite detailed, practical, and theoretical knowledge of particular areas of the law, which you need to get pretty specialised in.
Well, you just mentioned image rights, and I thought maybe we could talk a bit about image rights. Obviously, they're becoming increasingly important, and sort of the Dibala potential transfer to Tottenham sort of pops to mind. Could you tell us a bit about the importance of image rights and why they're becoming ever more important?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the general perception is that image rights are seen as something of like a way round players paying tax. You know, somehow that they pay less tax through image rights companies, and in a way that's some type of circumvention of the rules or the tax rules. And in a lot of ways, it couldn't really be further from the truth. A lot of the deals that I see, it depends how you classify image rights, but if effectively it is the right to be able to have one party endorse or use the image of, for example, a player, then ultimately what the player is looking to do is, or rather what the player has in this moment is effectively two quite unique and scalable and saleable assets. One is their on-pitch talent, i.e. the club paying them to train and to perform and to hopefully succeed on the pitch, and they're paid through an employment contract. And the other element is because obviously the Premier League is one of the most watched leagues in the world, and brands want to be associated with it in two ways. One, either because the club wants to use the player's image, appearances, exploit those assets that the player has for their own partnerships. That obviously has an intrinsic value. And also, for example, when the player is entering into individual deals it may have with a boot manufacturer or Beats or hair care brand, or whatever else it might be for endorsement capabilities. So a lot of those things become very important. And whilst in the past there have been issues to do with whether image rights have been a legitimate way of paying tax and making sure the players and talent are paying what they should be, I think it's certainly more obvious now that players have an off-field value, and that the idea is effectively to commercialise that value as much as they can.
And just on the Dibala, with the sort of stepping stone or the issue, the hurdle, would it have been down to not being able to agree the contract or the value of his image rights?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I do say in my book is sometimes what is being reported in the press isn't necessarily the reason why something has happened or hasn't happened or otherwise. It's sort of, as my grandfather always used to say, there's your side, my side, and then the truth. And in that way, I would almost caution reading something and thinking that is gospel, because a lot of the time there will always be angles, as you well know, on particular stories and how things work in particular ways. But that being said, there was a lot of reports that Dybala's move to Spurs fell away because he effectively didn't own his own image rights, that he had sold, or someone had sold his rights to a third party company. That third party company was exploiting them, i.e. Requiring companies to be able to pay a lot of money in order for that company then to endorse those products. And as a result, that company couldn't agree with Spurs as to the value of those rights or how that agreement was going to fall into place. In my experience, I don't usually see too many transfer deals fall apart because of image rights deals, is the truth. So it might have been more complicated than that. It might have been for other issues, or it might have simply been for that. It's difficult to know unless you're in it, I guess.
Yeah. You mentioned that you wrote your dissertation on the Bosman ruling, which is the free agent sort of breakthrough. But if you look at the current issues, so obviously a lot of contracts actually ended yesterday.
Yeah.
What do you think clubs should be doing, or what maybe give us a bit more detail on what's happened with the current contract situation in the extended season?
Yeah. Well, the short answer for that is that no one really envisaged a situation like this occurring generally. And the situation being is that employment contracts usually end by the 30th of June of every host season, because that's exactly what it is. The season would have finished probably in the month before. And therefore it gives a period of time for clubs either to decide whether to offer new contracts to players that are out of contract, or for players to move to other clubs as a result. But in effect, the timing as a result has really caused a number of practical issues because, for one, for example, because the season is still continuing past the date by which some players' contracts have expired, those players are not obliged to play for that club anymore. We've seen it with players like Ryan Fraser at Bournemouth, for example. And we've seen also the opposite of that with players like Willian and Pedro that were both out of contract to Chelsea, but I believe have signed short-term deals to cover until the end of the season. That, bearing in mind, is still the case when I think, if it's right, Pedro has signed a pre-contract with Roma.
Yeah, that sounds correct.
So the issue in a way is, as a player, do you risk signing a contract extension and possibly then getting injured and then moving to your new club with a potential injury? And then the same is the case for, Chelsea have bought a number of players, including Ziyech from Ajax, for example. He was due to start, or was due to transfer on the 1st of July, but the registration window won't be open yet. So he obviously won't be able to play this season for Chelsea. Chelsea are paying him, obviously not insubstantial wages, to join on that date. But whilst he will possibly be able to train with the team, he won't be able to play until the registration window opens, which will be after the end of the season, which is likely to be possibly the end of this month, depending on how things go.
And do you think maybe some clubs might benefit slightly more in this situation with sort of the change of the date of contracts?
Well, there's a few things, is the truth. It's not necessarily just the contracts. I mean, obviously having a more stable squad and players under long-term contract would certainly help. You saw the reports a while back about Burnley, for example, of there being a bit of instability there because particular players hadn't been offered at least extensions or longer-term extensions to deals, which created a bit of instability in the squad. But again, it's the same with having bigger squads and it possibly disproportionately benefiting those teams. So, for example, being able to make 5 substitutions in games, it obviously helps the squads or the teams that have bigger, more in-depth squads to be able to make those substitutions and make best use of their deeper squads. You only have to look to teams like Sheffield United that were doing very well, but don't have that same squad depth as Liverpool or Manchester City or Man United or others that are able then to, rotate as significantly.
And just sort of slightly changing up the convo a little bit, if you look at sort of the Newcastle takeover, which has been reported, do you think that the ethical test for the new Saudi buyers is likely to be a stumbling block, or do you think that they'll be able to sort of make their way through the deal?
It was interesting yesterday because the chief executive, Richard Masters, was talking about that particular point to, I think in a select committee, I think he was speaking with. The issue generally is there's a test called the owners and directors test, which used to be called the fit and proper person test. And that sets a number of objective criteria by which an owner, controller, an entity that can influence the day-to-day running of a club has to effectively pass. And a number of those criteria are quite important, like not having a criminal record, not being disqualified as a director, not being disqualified in a professional regulatory setting, or being under disqualification, not being made insolvent or going bankrupt, etc. But there's also another regulation in regards to piracy, and that in a way has been one of the stumbling blocks that the Premier League is having to currently overcome, because there was a World Trade Organization court decision about 2 weeks ago setting out that they believed that at least entities linked to the Saudi government were effectively pirating beIN, which is their competitor, the Qatar competitors' feeds. And that's been of real significance because the Premier League wrote to the Saudi government and Saudi officials a number of months ago complaining about their entities' piracy issues. So there's a lot to say. There's probably quite a few geopolitical issues arising, would probably be a bit of an understatement. But ultimately, the Premier League is making an objective decision based on its own regulatory criteria. And I think that's what is going through the process of now. But I think the noises, this isn't me being involved in the case, the noises seem to be suggesting that approval is probably likely.
Mm. Obviously, another big case sort of in like the financial world of football at the moment is sort of Manchester City and their issues with the FFP. What do you think the most likely outcome of that situation will be?
Yeah, it's a great one too. So watch this space, because probably in the next 2 weeks there'll be a press release explaining what's happened. I think also the Court of Arbitration for Sport, CAS, which is the body that is making the ruling, the arbitral panel that's making the ruling, is going to announce a few days beforehand that they are going to then announce. So look out for that. There's loads of interesting facets here. Effectively, UEFA has already banned Manchester City for the next consecutive 2 seasons worth of European football. Now, if that ban is upheld, query whether the top players will stay at Manchester City, because they won't be able to participate in Champions League competition for a number of seasons. And that also means 5th place in the Premier League gets Champions League football, which might be very important to the likes of Wolves or Man U or Chelsea even, for example, and others. On the actual merits of the case itself, it's very difficult to comment, because no one has, apart from the parties, have seen the evidence or the submissions or what is actually being put forward by either side, UEFA and the club. The club have said they've got irrefutable evidence to suggest that the actual initial sanction shouldn't have been imposed. So that's what CAS and the panel members are going to have to decide. So, I'm as good as guessing as you is the truth. The issue, more or less, is whether Manchester City have complied with the financial fair play regulations, haven't overstated their revenues. But if they cannot show that they have, then it's likely the ban is going to be upheld.
Whilst we're on financial fair play, an increasing trend is player swaps for sort of seemingly inflated values. So the Pjanic and Arthur swap recently, quite common in Serie A. Can you explain why clubs are looking to pay? So, for example, I remember last year, I think Juventus and Roma paid sort of 35 million for a youth left back who'd made minimal appearances. Why are clubs paying 35 million for someone who would normally go for 10 million?
Yeah. The answer is it's difficult without me having too much of a finance background, is the truth. But the short answer is, and I'd always recommend for the people who are watching this and listening to follow a great guy on Twitter. Well, there's 2 very good people on Twitter. One is The Price of Football, Kieran Maguire, and the other is a guy called The Swiss Ramble. And Swiss Ramble actually made reference to this exact point on the swap. And the short answer is that by being able to make 2 simultaneous transfers for certain amounts of money, it effectively allows the clubs to be able to demonstrate accounting profit. Because what effectively happens is, for a player, when they are bought, the cost of that player for accounting purposes is spread over the length of his contract. So, for example, a £50 million player signed on a 5-year deal for the club actually costs the club £10 million per season, i.e. 50 divided by 5. And so as a result of that, if let's just say 1 year in he transfers, that means his overall remaining value, his unamortized portion of his value, is 40 million, but then transfers for 60 million, the transfer profit is actually 20. So that's where transfer profit becomes quite important for FFP reasons. But again, that I think those type of accounting principles might need to be looked at by UEFA for a little bit of detail to make sure that there is no circumvention of the principles of the FFP regime.
And obviously, talking about sort of transfers. The price of the transfer market has been increasing for quite a while now, but obviously there was a story coming out yesterday that Man United were only prepared to pay 50 million for Jadon Sancho. Do you think due to COVID-19 there might be a significant decrease in transfer prices paid?
Yeah, it's a really good point. So I think the short answer is a little bit more nuanced, but the short answer is I think for elite talent at elite clubs, there is still going to be premium transfers, but there won't be that many of them because even COVID has hit the very big clubs like Manchester United and Liverpool and Chelsea and City in a number of ways. I'm positive of that. It doesn't mean that big transfers can't be ruled out. We're just seeing Sané move to Munich for almost 50 million euros yesterday, for example. So it's still a very large transfer for a player with not a huge amount of time left on his deal. I think the other element of it all is for those non-elite players at non-elite clubs, there will almost be a redefining of the value market, especially for the next couple of seasons. I think simply because some clubs will be in real financial need to receive transfer fees and monies and therefore might be willing to accept less. So it will certainly be a buyer's market for those with money. So in a way, what I mean is that I think once there are a few transfers that look like they have been at a lesser value, the market effectively realigns to the new normal and the new reality of the situation. And it means as a result that clubs may not be able to offer, tactically or otherwise, the largest wages for particular players, and the same for transfer fees. So there's almost a realigning of the value market.
Just want a bit more of a lighter note. Do you have any predictions for who's going to make Champions League football then in the Premier League, from a football fan's point of view?
Well, I'm probably not the best person to ask, really, as a gloating Liverpool fan.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I obviously City will get their query whether they qualify because of the CAS decision, and that would effectively mean I think it would be incredibly. It would look very likely Leicester will, and then the query really is probably for fourth place. It looks like. Chelsea are in pretty much prime position as well. But again, Wolves are on great run of form, and the same with Manchester United. So, it will make for fascinating reading to simply go with a few games to go of the season. What will probably happen is the result of the Man City decision will be out before the end of the season. So clubs will know where the fifth place might well get them Champions League, which will make obviously a very interesting conclusion.
Obviously, one of the clubs you haven't talked about, which some people might be a bit upset about, is Arsenal. Obviously, it's not doing so well at the moment. What do you think's really gone wrong at Arsenal since sort of Wenger's left, and why do you think they're sort of sitting at 10th in the table or wherever they are now?
Well, I think the short answer is that one of the main sticks aimed at Wenger was he could never get over the line to win a title over his latter years, and that just getting into the Champions League wasn't good enough every season. And now I think it's I say relatively straightforward, but from a recruitment perspective, it's very hard to get the top quality players into your squad if you're not playing Champions League football. But as importantly, if nothing else, the additional revenue generation from Champions League football is really significant these days. It can be, on a good run, Liverpool earned over 100 million euros from getting to the final last year, and again for possibly the season before. So a little bit less from not winning it, but from attractiveness of the proposition and from revenue generation, it's a massive hit, which means that some players may not want to join, but it also might mean that the club aren't able to pay the huge sums that they otherwise have done in the past because they simply can't afford it. So it's a combination probably of those two.
Just quickly, in your book, you mentioned some of the weirdest clauses you've been experienced even. Can you just give us a quick sort of rundown of other interesting sort of things you've seen in contracts, or the most interesting people you've represented?
Well, yeah. So I mean, I think I just feel a lot of the time very lucky is that what a lot of the time happens is I will work with agents and players on a variety of different deals. And, you know, I tend not to work for the clubs. I tend to work for the players when negotiating the deals. But, you know, to me, you know, when I look back over, you know, 15, 16, 17 years of my career so far, and then I watch football at the weekends and I'm like, yep, help that player do the deal, or, you know, I negotiated against that particular club at that time. It now feels a little bit matter of fact, is the truth. It's like, that's my day job and that's what I do. But still, it's just great to be in that space. And the truth is now, as much as I'm a Liverpool fan and I've done some Liverpool transfers, a lot of the time I'm more interested in hoping that the players in particular teams do well. So I'm almost like, you know, when, you know, I work with closely with particular agents and then their players as well. A lot of the time, you know, match of the day or watching games, I'm thinking how well that player's doing. You know, even last night for the Brighton Man U game, about how well those particular players are doing, that it helped to do those deals, for example. So it's almost like, it sounds a bit odd, it's almost like I feel quite proud that I can do my little bit to be able to help. And then it's almost like great to see when they do well. That's probably the best thing I'd say.
As a Fulham fan, obviously Liverpool took Harvey Eliot from us. If you could just quickly talk about maybe the compensation behind that deal and whether he might be getting a big pay rise in the future.
Well, there's two things there. So Liverpool more or less, if my understanding's right, signed Eliot whilst he was still a scholar, basically, for Fulham, and that meant that he hadn't signed a professional deal yet. And that effectively means is that Liverpool and Fulham would have had to have come to an agreement in order for a scholar transfer, effectively. What can happen, though, is that if at the end of a scholar agreement the player doesn't want to sign a professional deal with the club, then that player can move on effectively a free transfer, as we talked about. But the Premier League and the EFL rules stipulate that for any player in the Premier League or the EFL that moves on a free under a particular period of time before they're 24, then there is still compensation that has to be paid. So that won't necessarily be the case for Eliot, but he's now obviously quite close to, you know, starting his first Premier League game, is the truth, and he's looked very good so far. What's your view of him at all?
Well, I mean, I'd have loved to have him in the Championship. I feel like he could have stayed at Fulham, and obviously I'd have wanted him to stay at Fulham. But we're lacking a right winger, so we could. Well, we've got Knockaert, but anyway, he's not. I would have loved to have him in the Championship. I feel like he could have had a Ryan Sessegnon sort of esque season and then gone to a big club, which would have benefited us for a proper transfer fee.
Yeah.
But I think going to Liverpool, you can't. As a boyhood Liverpool fan, for him, I think he's made the right decision. However, financially, it just doesn't benefit Fulham.
So, quick question for you guys. Quick fire quiz. So, what do you think the top four will be, or second to fourth will be for this season?
Oof. I think Man City will finish second. I think Chelsea will pip Leicester, as a Chelsea fan as well, to come third. Then I think Leicester might bottle it. I think Man United might finish fourth. I think they'll have a strong run in.
I'm with John. I think since the break, I think Leicester have looked a little bit shaky. I think Chelsea have looked strong, and they've got the sort of the new signing sort of confidence. I mean, obviously, they're not playing for them, but they've got there's a lot of positivity around the club. So I can see, and Man United, I mean, I hate to say it, but their team looks like it could mount a serious challenge for top sort of four, maybe not a title, but Solskjaer seems to have improved his tactical awareness or the results. And if you look at the lineup, they've got a very strong lineup. So I think this season, I think Liverpool, City, and then Chelsea, and I think Leicester and Man U will fight for fourth.
I think Wolves will finish strong as well, though. I think they'll come in strong, and I think they could nick fifth spot. But obviously, it would be unlikely for Leicester to fall that low.
Yeah.
But
yeah, interesting. Well, look, hopefully we'll have the chance to chat again sometime soon. And thanks for the invite to have me on. And
very much coming on.
Thank you all for listening to this talk with Daniel Geey. It's been an absolute pleasure for us, and we hope you enjoyed the episode, and we look forward to having more next term. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.